Okay. I think we will go ahead and get started today. It's about 3:01, so just to honor your time and be respectful of that, go ahead and jump in. So thank you so much for meeting me here today for the art of showing up for yourself, progress over perfection. My intent today is just to offer some tools for sustaining change over time. We're going to include like just recognizing when we might need to regroup or recenter a bit, or even when we might need additional support. So this could be related to things like goals or intentions, or simply how we might need slight adjustment to our self-care practices over time. We should be together with me talking for about 40 minutes, but we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So if you have questions, please feel free to add them in the Q&A tab at any point. So Mayu, who is our wonderful strategic marketing director, is here with me today. She's going to field, hi Mayu. So she's going to field those questions and as well help me in just a few minutes when we do a quick writing exercise. So welcome. So my name is Karen. I'm a remote therapist with Meru. Most of you joining today are graduates of the Meru program. So kudos to you for investing in yourselves during those 12 weeks, and definitely again for being here today. I'm really grateful to be spending some time together today and just want to acknowledge the work you've already directed towards self-care during the program. So today is going to be all about editing often. This quote really resonated with me because it really anticipates our need to edit. And editing gives us more space to be accepting of mistakes and see them as an opportunity to grow. So with that in mind, take a look at the quote, and then after that, we'll begin with a brief writing exercise that I just would invite you to relax into, knowing that editing is always okay. So your life is your story. Write well, edit often. I'm going to start with just like a little look at the difference between intentions and goals. And then after that, hopefully settle into creating your intention for our time together today. Goals and intentions are not the same thing, but a lot of times we sort of view them that way. So goals, for example, are much more static. They're concrete and tangible. They tend to be really future-based. They're the things that we can sort of tick off our to-do list. Intentions are softer, and so they really kind of honor the ebb and flow of life and kind of experiences that we might be going through. They tend to be more aspirational and value-focused and really generally embody the present. So just some examples of intentions might be things like, I will listen to my intuition, or I plan to practice curiosity. Intentions might be around specific events, interactions, or even time periods. So for practice, I'm going to invite you to create an intention for our time together. So for the next 40 to 45 minutes, like what you might want to bring in as your intention for this time. And to make this as simple as possible, especially if you're not familiar with intentions, I've got 3 kind of templates that you might use to create this. So the first one is just using the beginning, I intend to invite, or I intend to practice, and sort of filling that in with a value or a verb that resonates with you for today. So an example of that might be something like, I intend to practice curiosity. Another way to create a simple intention for our time might be to use a value or an intent, or a value or action word over something else. So an example of that might be, I'd like to focus on mindfulness over distraction. Okay, so maybe choosing a value that's important to you and placing precedence on that over something else. And then the last example, or the last template, would just be to choose an anchor word for today. Again, values can be really helpful with this, but it could be anything that keeps you kind of grounded for the time. So examples might be an anchor word of gratitude or vulnerability or learning. Anything like that would work great for today. So speaking our intentions out loud or sharing them really increases their strength. So I'm going to go first in a moment by sharing an intention that I've been holding since the beginning of the new year. But I'd also like to invite you to share yours in a moment, and you can do that in the Q&A section. As Mayu sees those come in, if you share some, then she will help me to relay some of those back so we can kind of share them a little bit. Please know that it's absolutely optional. You do not have to share something, and it is absolutely okay if we don't have anyone share. It's just an invitation to do that if it might feel meaningful to you or comfortable. So I'll begin and just throw one out there for you to consider and hold. I hold courage as a really high value, but I really struggle to practice courage a lot of times. So an intention that I've been holding for 2022 is just courage over comfort. So for me, even today is really a good example of that, because my comfort zone is probably really more in face-to-face or one-on-one interactions. So just spending time in this way is really valuable to me, but also kind of presses me out of my comfort zone a little bit. So I would just invite you to take a moment and maybe finish up creating your intention for our time together. If there's anybody that would like to share it in the Q&A or in the chat, either one would work. Maya, you can pop in and let me know. Otherwise, I will keep moving and you can hold your intention during this time together as your own.
We got a really nice one from Lisa, that my New Year's intention was, it does not have to be perfect, which helps me frame the challenges of life.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. That's beautiful. I love that. And perfection's even part of our intention today, is having progress over perfection, or making progress is a more attainable, value-driven place to be than looking for perfection. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Motivation, momentum, and modification. So how do the pieces fit? I say one of these nouns is not quite like the other, right? So at first glance, motivation and momentum, I think, can feel pretty similar. Modification feels a little more distinct. So today we're really going to lean into momentum and modification and kind of lean away from motivation. We'll touch on those three concepts quickly just to make sure we're all sort of speaking the same language. So motivation is a force that makes people act, set goals, and achieve them. It is a psychophysiological process that controls human behavior as well as sets its direction and initial action. So it's really the push to things. So I think of it sometimes as motivation as being the spark, or like the kindling of a fire. In regards to sustaining change, motivation prompts the process, right? Really starts things off. It's where we would connect our why to our goals and set a plan. So in January, one of our other Meru therapists, the amazing Trish Jonker, covered this really beautifully. So I'd really encourage you, if you haven't seen the January webinar, to revisit that. Mayu, if you maybe could share that link in the chat, that would be great. So if you're able to go back and see that, she really dives into the idea of motivation and setting SMART goals and kind of an action plan. Again, today we're sort of going to focus more on the other two. And so kind of moving into this idea of momentum. Momentum is really more the force that allows something to grow, or to grow faster and stronger as time passes. So momentum is a sustained process rather than that initial push, if that kind of resonates. So this I like the idea. And if you're somewhere that you can even like close your eyes for a moment or soften your gaze as I kind of walk through this. This is in my mind's eye, kind of a good representation of a snowball. So hence the picture there. So if you kind of picture a snowball, what happens if a small clump of snow begins to roll down a mountain? That's momentum, that picture that you have in your mind. The energy grows, it becomes more steady. It might even start to sort of take on a life of its own. Sometimes a big snowball can even like knock obstacles to the side and continue. So it might get off path or chart like a course that wasn't expected, but it continues to build that momentum. And actually momentum breeds momentum over time. So today we're going to look at ways to build momentum and sustain the changes that you want. And then the last kind of core concept for today is this one around modification. Modification is a change or alteration, usually to make something work better. Modification is really all about pliability. So as you kind of gaze at this picture, I wonder what stands out to you about it. What do you most notice? The tree has sort of turned and bent and wandered to the side. Because this tree was pliable and resilient, it's grown stronger over time rather than weaker. So I think it's a really lovely visualization of how making adaptations often leads to really new beauty and new strength. Whatever the reasons that this tree, needed to change, we don't really know that, but it had to readjust in order to thrive. And so that's what it did. So the change that was created through adaptation and resilience as this tree grew is really something unique and beautiful. And I think adapting and making changes in our own stories can be really beautiful as well. So today is really just an invitation to start noticing where you might need to modify. And we kind of tie these pieces together by thinking about motivation as, again, the foundation of change, and maybe even, as I mentioned before, kind of referring back to the webinar from January, which are some really good tools around this. Momentum, you can sort of reflect on that snowball and think about how as it continually grows, so it continually rolls, it grows in lots of really tangible ways. This is the foundation of sustainability. So while motivation is sort of our foundation for change, that spark, momentum becomes more the foundation of sustainability. And then modification, looking at our tree again, is really, just envisioning that tree and seeing how it was attuned to its needs. This is really the foundation for growth. So why do we even need tools to maintain momentum? Or does the saying change? Let's just start to take a look and see. So sustaining change is hard. It's not you, it's science. Have you noticed that change is challenging? And maintaining change, that can feel nearly impossible. You're not alone and you're not wrong. There are real, predictable reasons that we find ourselves wrestling to maintain motivation. The really great news is that there are also real practical ways to sustain change beyond that initial push. So just a couple of quick things under the did you know, like the average New Year's resolution, or really any new commitment that we make, tends to end at about day 32. I think of that as kind of like that's the motivation piece. That's that initial spark, and it gives us energy, but the energy is not super long or sustained. Most of us need about 66 days to create a sustainable habit or change. This is where momentum becomes really important. And then modification, or the last piece, habits, are loops that really need cultivation and care even beyond the 66 days. So that's the process, or that's the phase, maybe is a better way to say it, of really modification. Again, starting out with the idea of we do need that initial push, we do need that initial motivation, but that's likely to sort of pass through in about a month. And so how do we kind of move into this more momentous part of sustaining change, that 66 days or longer? And these are just averages. You may have different personal experiences. And then how do we beyond that kind of lean into those, cultivating that growth for longer periods of time? That's really where we're going to dive in today. So when we acknowledge, we're going to look at some barriers to get started. And I think it can be really important, because when we acknowledge the barriers that might come up, then we become a lot more able to edit because we're more prepared. So this is really, I think, one of the pivotal pieces of growth and change, is finding the spaces where we might want or need to edit our stories, to know that that's a predictable part of the process, and to really embrace the piece that that modification and editing is necessary and could be really helpful. So as we go through the next 4 slides, I would just kind of invite you to notice if any of these barriers seem familiar to you. Some will, some probably won't, and that's absolutely okay. As you notice barriers that fit or sound right, I just wonder, can you be curious about whether the information of just acknowledging them could really help you to consider ways you might want to edit any of these like goals, intentions, or plans that you might have. So we'll start with this first one, which is we're motivated by negative emotions. And again, for all of you that were in the Meru program already, you know we talked about this as the negativity bias. It's not you, it's a very real part of all of our brains. And so knowing that that is there, what can we do? So let's start with, if you know this. So one review of 129 behavior change studies found that the consistently least effective change strategy hinged on fear, regret, or other negative emotions. So the counter is kind of necessarily true. Change, editing, growth really needs a positive platform. These are things like gratitude and optimism in order to maintain momentum. So if we know that, then what can we do? Well, when we notice obstacles like doubt and fear and frustration, we can really invite curiosity in. So what that kind of looks like in our internal dialogue is just acknowledging like, oh, aha, this is a doubt, or this is restlessness. This is part of what people go through, and I'm learning to notice this, and it's normal and it's okay, and there's no need for me to really fight this feeling or this thought. A little toolbox tip is, if you'd like to, you can revisit either the recap and reflection practice of week 3 that's called The Fight Between Two Wolves. We really, it's a nice guided imagery of how the negativity bias impacts us and how we can sort of steer ourselves away from that a bit. Another barrier that can sort of get in our way is the idea of having thinking fallacies or cognitive distortions. These are tricky. These kind of come at us, and sometimes we don't even realize that they're happening. So it's normal to feel overwhelmed by change sometimes. Feeling overwhelmed tends to lead to some of these thinking fallacies, especially the all or nothing version. That's what looks like, if I can't do this now, or if I can't do this perfectly, then I'm just not going to do it. When you notice a thinking trap coming into play or a cognitive distortion coming into play, and again, these were part of your week 6 during the Meru program, you can choose, or we can take that extra step of acknowledging the thinking trap, reminding ourselves that traps aren't truth. We can engage our 5 senses as a way of kind of pulling back into the present. We can write down and evaluate the thoughts so that we can kind of look at them with a little bit of a microscope and evaluate their validity and truth. Or we can listen to a guided meditation as ways of sort of regrouping again on the present. In week 6, the worry maze is an excellent tool for walking through these. There's also a wonderful worries and thinking traps lesson that sort of reminds us of those connections. Another barrier can sometimes be underestimating the process, right? So we set a goal, or set an intention or have a plan, and we don't take everything into account, or maybe new things come into play that we couldn't have taken into account. So if we know that change is never just one thing, if we know that it's a lot of connected things, and that sustained change doesn't happen without a process that considers all the pieces and allows space to edit, then we can do this. We can practice reverse gap thinking to stay grounded and really honor the process of editing and regrouping. So reverse gap thinking, if you haven't heard about that before, is really simple and also, I think, pretty powerful. So it builds positivity into the process of sustaining change by sort of shifting our gaze. Okay, so reverse gap thinking, I lost track of my words for a minute there. It helps you to make a gaze shift at what you have accomplished versus what's ahead, right? So it's a recognition of the momentum that you've already created, whether that's 1 step or 1,000 steps, and being able to kind of look back and see what has happened, as opposed to focusing forward on what is yet to happen. It's 100% okay to look back and notice some drifting off course or away from, the original plan. The reverse gap glance sort of allows us to look back and not expect perfection, but to really expect adjustments and to be able to inventory the process that we've already poured energy into. So another barrier that sometimes happens is we forget that failure is a normal piece of the puzzle. So we've sort of already touched on this, but it's just the idea of like, if we know missing a goal or having a setback or failing are events, not character traits, right? I love this. I did not know this before getting ready for today, but Abraham Lincoln left to serve in the Civil War as a captain, and he returned home as a private. Like that doesn't feel like huge success, right? And yet there was a lot of success to his life and to his future. And so it's really knowing that we may not know all of the pieces ahead of time, and we may have a setback and there may be failures or mistakes or missteps along the way is not only okay, but pretty anticipated. If we know that, then we can do this. We can keep a I did it list to measure our momentum. It's the opposite of a to-do list, which can kind of bog us down sometimes. We list our steps of progress and success and observe what's gone well. As a quick toolbox tip again, if you would like to revisit week 7, the gratitude journal is a great way or space to practice this. So responding to barriers when this is time to edit. So we're going to look at how we can check in with ourselves and maybe begin to be responsive to our needs. So again, just thinking through the barriers we just touched on. If 1 or 2 or 3 sounded familiar to you, here are some things that we might be able to do to sort of adjust our sails. So the RAIN practice is a really simple one. I like acronyms because it makes it easy, I think, to access them later for our brains to remember them. So RAIN is just an acronym that stands for recognize, and that's recognizing what is going on when something feels off course and you might need to reset. Allow it, just allowing that experience to be there. Then investigating with kindness and curiosity. And finally, nurturing whatever that experience is with a loving presence. The practice is an invitation to check in with yourself without judgment, without curiosity, and just kind of discover, like, what do you need? How can you move towards those needs better? I think of it as, the RAIN practice really invites rest, and it creates space to be compassionate with yourself. After you walk through, or any of us walk through RAIN slowly, you might just simply ask yourself those questions, like, what do I need? And it might be as simple as a glass of water or some time to myself, or it might be a connection with friends or something else. It might even be, just touch on that, like connecting with a therapist or a close friend would be helpful as well. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped something. There we go. So the next kind of tool that we could talk about, get grounded. There are some opportunities for this 5-sense awareness practice in week 1 of the Maru app, if you'd like to revisit that. But I like this one as well. Similar to the RAIN practice, it's easy to remember, which makes it really accessible to us. The idea here is, I also use the acronym. Sometimes it helps me to remember things. SOS, so step away and open your senses. Can you tune in a moment that you need to regroup or reset to 5 things that you can hear? I'm sorry, 5 things that you can see. It really doesn't matter the order that you do your senses, but 5 things that you can see, then 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can feel, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you could taste. That's an easy, simple tool to carry with you, because we can generally remember 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and recall what those senses are. So the 5-sense grounding practice really creates space to regroup and allows you to just check in with each of those senses. It can be shortened or extended to help you step out of autopilot, which is usually kind of connected to anxiousness or getting ahead of ourselves, and get back into the present moment. Both our sense of clarity and calm really tend to increase when we slow down and reconnect to the present moment. And again, the SOS grounded practice is really helpful in doing that. Once we feel a little bit more reconnected, it becomes a lot more manageable to sort out what we may need to do next. I think we have time. So what I might invite you to do, I want to keep a close eye on things and really honor your time, but I might invite you to do just for a moment is if you're in a space where it's comfortable to soften your gaze or even close your eyes. And we'll just check in with two of the senses. So it invites you to do that if you feel comfortable. If you would prefer to keep your eyes open, that is absolutely fine as well. But I just wonder if you might be able to tune in to one or possibly two other sounds besides my voice that you notice in the space around you at the moment. And are you able to sort of connect with whether those sounds are near or whether they're sort of distant from where you are? And I wonder, even as you sort of hold on and listen to the sounds that may be in your environment beyond my voice, if you might be able to also just tune into something that you are feeling and noticing in your body at the moment, whether it's maybe tightness in a shoulder or hunger in your belly since we're around lunchtime, or a scratch or an itch somewhere on your body, if you might just be able to tune into that for just a moment. And when you're ready, I'm going to move to the next slide. You might just rejoin me here as we look at the next obstacle that sometimes can pop up for us. I'm sorry, the next tool when obstacles do pop up. So building boundaries. So inventorying our boundaries really allows an opportunity to reset. So again, I sort of think of the RAIN practice as a way to rest. Sometimes we can press into the grounding SOS practice as a way to regroup. And now when we're ready to reset, maybe it's time to sort of inventory our boundaries. So as a reminder, boundaries tend to fall into the categories here: emotional, physical, material, time, intellectual, and sexual boundaries. Brene Brown defines boundaries really simply, and I love this. She just defines boundaries as what is okay and what is not okay. So if you're having a tough time figuring out like how to frame boundaries, sometimes just talking with somebody out loud can be a helpful step, but also sort of regrouping and looking at the types of boundaries can be really helpful in thinking, is this a boundary? Am I needing a boundary around time with this, or is this more of an emotional boundary? What might be going on that can help you to sort of figure that piece out? As an affirmation to, and as I'm talking, maybe I'd invite you to look at the signs that new or different boundaries may be needed. Apologize for kind of skipping over that, but the signs that you see here are really important to kind of inventory for yourselves. Sometimes we'll notice that we're really irritable and we don't attribute that to perhaps needing a different or changed boundary. Doesn't always mean that, but it could. Some of the other signs that we might want to modify or add or change boundaries could be feeling responsible for other people's thoughts and feelings, noticing that you feel resentful a lot of the time, maybe finding it difficult to make decisions. Having a never-ending to-do list is often a red flag around this as well. Not asking for what you need, or waking up tired, which is kind of a tangible one that sometimes we can really notice. Just sort of as an affirmation around the importance of boundaries, that they really do matter and how vital they can be. Brene Brown, again, referencing back to her, she has a lot of research that shows a really direct and strong correlation between boundaries and compassion. So the way she describes it is the most boundaried people are the most compassionate people. So I share that just as like affirmation around the idea that healthy boundaries really actually grow your capacity to be compassionate, engaged, and connected, which is, absolutely helpful to you, but also to the people around you. And move on a little bit to like recognizing, when it's kind of beyond boundaries or practices, is it recognizing that maybe we need a little bit more support. So we'll kind of move into that now. So if you take just a minute and think back to the last slide, some of the indicators of I might need boundaries. You know, there are things like waking up tired, those. How many of the signs do you remember? And which, if any of those resonated with you? I would just invite you to sort of think about that. These same indicators can sometimes, not always, but sometimes suggest a need for additional support. Another way to check in with yourself is by reviewing the Maru Health questionnaires. So you may, again, if you've done the program, have some of those saved in your emails or within your app. You can kind of walk back through and reread the questions and just kind of check with yourself. Are some of these on the health questionnaires, we ask you to kind of quantify how you're feeling on a scale of 0 to 3. So if you notice around some of those symptoms that you're choosing 2s and 3s, it may be a time to recognize a need for a little bit different or other or more support. And then finally, a really simple tool for self-checking is to ask yourself, like, how would I direct a friend that was feeling this way? Okay, let's move that around a little bit. So toughing it out or like white knuckling it are really not our best choices for managing stress or managing times when we need to edit or adjust or sort of sustain change and stay on track or try to regroup. So if we notice that we are toughing it out, that we're white knuckling it, that we're sometimes an indicator around this can be that you're hearing from friends or colleagues or family things like you're so tough, or I don't know how you get everything done, or it's really amazing, you always seem calm and together, and you're having an internal response of that's kind of the opposite of how I feel. That's a really good indicator of needing to kind of check in. This doesn't mean that you know, there's an emergency or that there's something wrong or that there's something unusual or not normal about that response. It's just a good way to sort of check in with ourselves. So needing support is really normal. It's really healthy, much more so than white knuckling or toughing it out. So asking for support that we need builds resilience. So I love each of these quotes. I'll let you kind of read each one on your own because they really kind of point to that idea of self-care and asking for the support that we need. And sometimes asking for the support that we need is just an internal question, kind of going back to some of the coping strategies from a few minutes ago. Like, what do I need to feel a little bit more resilient and stronger in this moment? But sometimes the questions could be better supported by talking with a friend or reviewing some of your strategies again from the program, or even perhaps reaching out to a therapist, something like that. So we'll kind of move next into some ways you might do that. And let's see. Okay, so these things I want to kind of just check in with Mayu. I think one of the things we might do is share either links to this page, or I don't know, after the webinar today, to be able to share this information with you as you've attended today, so that you don't have to feel like you've got to capture all of this right now. But if you need to have a need or think you may have a need to reach out for additional support beyond the coping tools that you have available currently, or beyond maybe talking with a friend, I've got some strategies here for doing that. A really simple one is calling 211, getting connected with a variety of health resources, and this will include mental health resources in your area. There's an online therapist locator here, as well as Psychology Today is a great resource. We often use that within Meru to help find additional resources, but it's open and available to anyone to use as well. Definitely checking with employee benefits. That is growing and changing so much in our culture now. And I think companies are really understanding the importance of resilience for employees, and taking care of people well means taking care of all parts of us. And so that's another option. Most counties have a crisis center that can be found pretty easily as well. Calling 988 and is a crisis care or suicide prevention crisis line. You can reach them that way. There are 800 numbers there as well. 988 makes it easy. Also, most people are not aware of this, but there's an option to text as well, 741-741. So I wanted to kind of begin to wrap things up a little bit, and then we'll check in and see if there are questions or specifics that we might dive into together as well. But I wanted to give you a couple of sort of just wrap up ideas and tips moving forward. Give me just a minute. So the first tip, we've kind of just touched on this, but asking for help is a practice in setting healthy boundaries. And so that circles right back into tools that we can use, setting boundaries, maintaining boundaries, adjusting them, implementing them can be very helpful. And asking for help is a form of setting a boundary. So I just kind of want to validate that and know that that very much falls in the category of supporting yourself well and with purpose. This is really great news because kind of restating something that I mentioned earlier. Brene Brown, one of the things I really appreciate her is she does a lot of research around these concepts. So these aren't just ideas that sound right. They are highly researched ideas. And her research really shows a deep, strong connection between boundaries that are healthy and useful to being more compassionate as a human being. HRV practices. I really will encourage you, if you haven't visited those in a while, this is a beautiful practice. You are a whole human being, and somatic practices of self-care are really lovely ways to take care of yourself well, your mental health especially, but it does have impact on your whole body health. HRVB practices are available to you in the app, so you can revisit those. I would really encourage that, and I would just remind you that they're super practical and helpful in two ways. One is at the time or at a specific time when you might feel a need to regroup or reset, but also over time with continued practice, they really treat our parasympathetic nervous system well and help that part of us which promotes calm, help that to stay engaged, and that can be a lovely way to take care of yourself well. Another side note about HRVB practices that I really appreciate is it gives us a break from having to really think a lot about our emotions or process them. We just get to do a breathing practice, and it's very powerful. Another toolbox tip is Kristen Neff. I have a link here, and again, hopefully we can share these in a way that's really accessible for everybody. She has a lot of work on self-compassion, which is really just switching gears from the inner critic to speaking to ourselves and engaging with ourselves in the same way we would with a friend or somebody that we cared about. She has a lot of information on her site about how to practice self-compassion. She also has really wonderful auditory or practices that you can listen to. And this Motivating Self-Compassion is a workbook of hers that is very valuable if you enjoy working in workbook sort of fashion. So I think we're about ready to wrap up, Mayu. I would be super glad to answer any questions if anybody has them. And I think we're good.
Thank you so much, Karen. This has been beautiful. And as I wrote on the chat earlier, I will share all these resources with you in the follow-up email together with the recording of this webinar. So you will get all of those. We did have a few questions. One question was, I think this is related to the RAIN practice. And the question was, what does investigate mean here? What does it look like in practice?
Okay, good question. Let me see. Let me see if I can get back to that. I'm not super good with slides. Give me a second. Yes, so that's a really good question. So the RAIN practice, again, is nice to carry with us because acronyms, I think, or countdowns are just kind of easy to remember. So investigate with curiosity and kindness means you might ask yourself things like, so I recognize that I'm feeling anxious. So rather than fight that, I'm going to allow that to happen. I wonder if I might be curious about how anxiety, for example, feels. Am I noticing this in my body? Am I noticing it in my thoughts? How am I experiencing this? So it's where you start to ask yourself some questions. And what this is doing is it's starting to create an awareness for us of a specific emotion to how we experience that. So it does a lot of really neat things. One of it kind of moves us away from saying things to ourselves like, I'm upset, because upset's not a feeling. It's a big nebulous globble of feelings, right? So it's starting to kind of tease them apart so that we can really acknowledge and recognize the feeling, allowing it again. The investigate, it's such a good question. The investigate is more about help me to understand what this feels like. Can I be curious about what might have created it? Can I make some connections to the why of what's going on here? I hope that helps.
Thank you. And then we have another, this might be more of a comment than a question, but I think it's a very interesting one. As we age, issues of retirement arise. Despite well-considered plans, curveballs may abound. Perhaps this could be a subject focus for future practice. Regardless of our age and where we are in our pre-retirement life, it is something to begin developing plans at any time. And if you want to speak to that.
Yes. So whoever shared that, yes. And Meru, actually, it's one of mine too. But we have a presentation. We have another webinar, and it is around basically phases of life and changes that occur. And you're exactly right, because different stages of life invite very different things for us, and even across those stages it's not the same for everybody. But that's a really beautiful observation. I very much agree. So we do have a webinar on that, so I'm not sure when or if we will be presenting that soon somewhere, but it's absolutely a valid point, and I appreciate that somebody brought that up.
Great. We have a few more questions. One is there a time when I should just give up on my goal? When is it okay to give up?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think the short answer is yes. And so if a goal, and I think maybe a little bit of a reframe is, rather than give up, is it time to let go of that? Does it no longer serve me, right? So I don't know if there's a specific, thing in mind that this person is thinking, but sometimes, yes, our circumstances change. I think that might fall a little bit into recognizing, how do the pieces fit together, and recognizing the slide that says, oh, let me go back and find it, because I want to say it right so that it kind of ties in together. It's one of my short answer is yes, it is okay to do that, because we're trying to adjust and take into account more information, right? So that goes back to the idea of, we might not have known all the pieces when we got started. New things might have come in. Thank you. You're looking for me. New things might have come in that change the story. And going back to the very first slide, like edit often. Sometimes editing is letting go and moving on. And that's a form of progress for sure.
That's great. And one more question we have. When you are involved in the cause of change for others, how can we use this to support them? I imagine what are some strategies to help others in their path for change?
I think I missed the first part. Can you read it to me one more time? Because it sounds like a really important question, so I want to get it right.
Absolutely. When you are involved in the cause of change for others, how can we use this to support them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think so. There's a practice in counseling about using open-ended questions. So I think that's even something we can apply, outside of that. And one of the simplest, maybe open-ended questions is to ask the other person, like, how can I support you? What do you need? That can get to be a harder question if maybe somebody is, if you're wanting to support somebody around a goal or a process that they're going through that maybe you struggle with or don't agree with, that can be a little bit harder. And I don't think that's what the question was asking. But if you're trying to come alongside somebody, I think one of the most practical things we can do is say, I want to support you in this. How can I do that? Is it helpful if I stay out of the way? Is it helpful if I check in? Is it helpful if I ask you how you're doing? Just having some open-ended questions about that and really letting the person know, like, sometimes I have to ask myself, what do I need as I'm pursuing a goal? So I just am wondering what you need because I want to be part of that.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Karen. That was actually the last question we had. There was one really nice comment in the chat box that I would love to read out loud. Out loud.
Right.
Joanne said that I learned a lot, really helpful with things I've been thinking about recently. I like the balance. Seems like a softer but equally important way to go about things in contrast to just charging ahead but losing yourself in the process, which we're probably all very familiar with as well.
Yeah. Thank you
So
for that
thank you so
comment.
much, Karen.
Thank you. My
We're gonna
pleasure.
get some about 10 minutes back. And as mentioned before, I will send all the participants the recording of this webinar with all the resources that Karen has mentioned here in the coming few days.
Thank you, Mayu. Thank you for being here, everyone.